Welcome to KAKOVISION, a podcast to pump you up to change the world. Hosted by me, Jordana. Let's get started. In this episode of KAKOVISION, we're going to talk about why there really is no middle class anymore. And I am happy that our first guest interview was with Professor Peter Temin about his book, The Vanishing Middle Class, Prejudice and Power in a Dual Economy. So Peter is an economic historian and economist. He's professor of economics at MIT and former head of the economics department. So I'm really excited to share that discussion with you. But before I do that, I'm going to talk about the first episode of Utopia vs. Dystopia, which I released last Thursday. Utopia vs. Dystopia is basically a mashup of different clips on a particular issue. So this first episode was on corruption and billionaire greed. And on the website, I have links to the full clips as well. So I'm trying to make it as easy and painless as possible for people to understand what's going on. So this episode is 15 minutes, and I'm also going to hit the key points and talk about it on this podcast. But I want you to know that it's not just me. That's why I'm taking all of these clips, and I don't want to recreate the wheel. This starts out by talking about a book, Dark Money. And it takes a clip of the author being interviewed. So the author, Jane Mayer, talks about how this was a concerted effort by really wealthy people to shift American politics over the course of several decades. The biggest takeaway for me after reading the book was how intentional it was that we got here. So it wasn't like we made some bad choices, elected some bad people. No, this was really wealthy people who had this objective, devised a strategy on a massive level, and worked for decades to get to this point. And I think it's really important to point out because it's going to take just as much intention, and the scale has to be just as massive if we're going to dig ourselves out of this. So I don't want to talk too much about that book because I did invite Jane Mayer to speak on this podcast. So hopefully at some point she will share with us her insights and wisdom on this topic. The next is a clip from Represent Us. And Represent Us is a nonprofit organization, nonpartisan, working on trying to get the corruption out of our political system. So they're trying to raise awareness to what's going on, and one of their board members happens to be Jennifer Lawrence. So she shot this very informative video, which again, I'll include in the episode webpage. But here are some of the key points. We're not even considered a full democracy anymore. There was a Princeton University study that she talks about that tracks public opinion over 2 decades and how that has influenced the laws that Congress has passed. And what that study found was that the average American appear to have only a minuscule, near zero, statistically non-significant impact on public policy, which is just awful. And this is why I say we can't depend 100% on politicians. Yes, we need to vote. We need to try to change the corruption, obviously, but there are just too many issues. And that's actually one of my favorite parts of this clip is when Jennifer Lawrence talks about how, yeah, they have this corruption, but this inaction, we are allowing this to happen. And by allowing this to happen, we're causing the failure of all of these other important issues. And we're going to talk about the same thing later in this episode with Professor Temen. But this affects everything from climate change to 1 in 5 kids living in poverty. The next clip is a TED Talk from Keith Payne, who's professor of psychology and neuroscience at UNC and the author of The Broken Ladder. He talks about economic inequality. And really, it's not as important how much money you have, but how unequal of a society you live in. and how economic inequality is related to all sorts of issues. So shorter lifespans, drug abuse, less happiness, more crime, like everything that we're seeing is related to this problem of economic inequality or correlated to this problem of economic inequality. So he shows where the United States is in comparison to other developed nations, and we are like off the chart. Or in this case, the chart was expanded, or it looks like it was expanded to fit the United States because we are a clear outlier. This isn't normal. Other countries are facing economic inequality and increases in economic inequality, but not anywhere near the United States. I added some content into this episode where I talk about it's not the 1%, it's the 0.01% that's the problem. So nobody that I have met in my lifetime would fall into the category that I'm talking about. I'm talking about like the Forbes 400. And I'm not necessarily blaming them. I'm blaming the system that's in place and the ones that are trying to manipulate it for their benefit at the expense of everyone else. It's hard to comprehend how much money $1 billion is. So I try to compare it to $1 million because I think a lot of people don't realize it's like at some point that it's just a shitload of money and that's it. But magnitudes, they matter. And when we're talking about billionaires, we need to understand what that really means. To try to put it into perspective, 1 million seconds into the year 2021, which is when I worked on the Utopia versus Dystopia series, was January 12th at lunchtime. It's 1 million seconds into the year. 1 billion seconds would be September 17th, 2052. To put Jeff Bezos into perspective, if you worked 24 hours a day, 365 days a year since the birth of Christ, earning $4,000 an hour, you still wouldn't have made as much as Jeff Bezos made in 2020 alone. Look, these elite few have disrupted our entire society. I end with a clip from PBS NewsHour, interviewing the authors Richard Wilkinson and Kate Pickett, both epidemiologists who co-authored The Inner Level. They talk about the health effects of economic inequality and how our world is better if you live in a more equal society. You could have the same of everything, the same education, the same income, the same social class, but the more equal of a country you live in, you'll have a happier life in every way and a healthier life. And so when the United States is such an outlier, that means that we are feeling the effects of this. And I think about where we are and how we're the wealthiest country and we're the most unequal. This is not something that only the effects can be felt on the people who are financially strained. We live in the wealthiest country and we're doing the worst. It doesn't need to be the case, but it requires enough people to care enough to try something different. And so that's what we're trying to do with Keiko. If you haven't checked out the intro series, definitely do that. And stay tuned for the discussion with Professor Temen. Since this podcast is new, we have no sponsors. So I will shamelessly plug Keiko. And if you get sick of hearing this, then reach out to become a sponsor.
Keiko, the social app. K-A-K-O. Keiko, the social app. K-A-K-O. Keiko, the social app. Keiko rules. Keiko, the social app. Billionaire greed? Keiko, the social app. Destroying America. Keiko, the social app. T-minus 7 years and counting. Keiko, the social app.
Hi, and welcome back to KAKOVISION. As I mentioned earlier, I have a wonderful guest on the show today. Peter Temin is an economic historian and economist, currently Gray Professor Emeritus of Economics at MIT and former head of the economics department. So he knows what he's talking about. He's authored over a dozen books, but the one that we're discussing here today is The Vanishing Middle Class: Prejudice and Power in a Dual Economy. And with that, here's our discussion. First, I just wanted to thank you so much for your time. I know that it's valuable. I really enjoyed your book and wanted to kind of talk over some of the points in it because I think it's really important, and I think that people really need to kind of understand the situation that we're in right now.
Okay, yes. Seems to be quite relevant in the pandemic. The rich have gotten richer. So the book is sold quite well. So do you want to ask me some questions? I'm happy to respond.
Sure. Obviously, it is so relevant, and with the pandemic, billionaires have just padded what they already have. But you point out a very important connection between race and that kind of being this undercurrent, which has allowed for this dual economy to really be created, and how our political environment right now has frozen it in place, or effectively, frozen it in place. And we're still struggling with the same issues that you're bringing up. If anything, things are progressing worse. When it comes to voting rights, and the same tactics are being used. So what do you think that we can do?
Well, I don't really know that we have much to do at the moment. You give money to your favorite candidates, but that's all you can do at the moment, or you can go on street demonstration. But the Me Too demonstrations didn't accomplish very much,
Mm-hmm.
but it's a good outlet for people's rage at what's happening for that. But the nearest time will be the fall election. And since money matters very much,
Mm-hmm.
the Republicans have the support of the oil industry, which is preventing our president from doing much to help climate heating
Mm-hmm.
this respond. There's a TV broadcast that called American Emergency or Earth Emergency, which shows that if it goes too far, all life will disappear. So it's a very difficult position to be in.
So yeah, we've got this kind of ticking clock, and right now, we're kind of paralyzed from responding. Our government doesn't seem to be able to agree on even the most basic things. And economic inequality and political polarization, they're tied because of the corruption, right? Like, because of these industries that have just so much money. And you talked about it in your book with Alec and writing the legislations. And when we're depending on lobbyists to write our legislation, obviously it's not going to benefit the working class and the people that aren't donating big money to candidates.
Yes, that's right. And so the sense of what's going on since Citizens United in 2013, money was allowed in campaigns, and the businessmen and the newly rich men don't want to give back the Trump tax cut. And so it's very hard to do anything to help the election uh, for that, but to go out and vote. And so that's what we all need to do. And if your friends need help getting to the polls or want help with a mail ballot, by all means, help them.
I think voting is very important at this moment.
Right.
I'm
I think so.
I'm also scared though that so much reliance is placed on our political system. And when we look at, the past couple of decades, it hasn't mattered, Democrat, Republican, the problem has continued to get worse. Obviously,
Right.
there's magnitudes, right? It's you've got to pick the lesser of two evils is what you always hear with voting. But even when you pick the lesser of two evils, I'm not sure if you've seen the study put out by some professors at Princeton University, but they looked at the last 2 decades of decisions that have been brought before the House and the Senate and have determined that there's been a statistically insignificant impact from the working class, from the everyday people really don't have their voice isn't being heard.
No, I think that's exactly right. And so we are slipping back for the race relations. And at the moment, we're foreseeing war with Russia coming on. And we don't want it to be a full class war in this nuclear age. And so Biden has promised to have economic responses, which will hurt both economies. And but the people seem to be quite happy to pay that in taxes. The tax rate has gone too down.
Yeah, I think there's so many like critical issues, right? That we're right on the verge of. All this discourse, it's all kind of related. So one of the studies by a Stanford professor showed that when economic inequality gets to this level, the historical leveling events have been war, revolution, plague, and state collapse. And
Yeah,
those are obviously not good. And when you look at 2020, it's like almost all of them were on the table at one point, right?
right, right. And so, but the taxes on the rich have gone way down from where they were just after the war, or starting from 1960 on. And then under Republican administrations since then, and Clinton's kind of separate attempted middle ground, the taxes have gotten lower. And so it has been very hard to get the government to do anything for poor people, immigrants, blacks, browns, and the Asians for whom violence is coming. And so we may be in a civil war as well as a war with Russia.
Yeah, and we saw that we had an uprising on our own soil, right? It's like we're we're
Exactly.
we're on the edge on so many issues. We're on the edge on civil war. We're on the edge on, world wars. We're on the edge of climate change and hitting this point where we can't dig ourselves out of. And we already
Right.
see the effects of climate change. I think that there's no denying, when I was growing up versus now, it's like there are emergency weather emergencies all the time, everywhere. there really doesn't seem to be a safe spot anymore where you
yeah,
could just go retire peacefully, right?
right, right. It's just very hard. And, yes, it's very hard to know what to do for this unless you are a billionaire. Then you could do something. But some of the billionaires who have done this have not caught the public idea. And Trump had the advantage of having been a TV personality for more than a decade, acquired the skills of speaking to everybody and so on. And so he's been able to lead our government into very dangerous positions.
That and his relation with media, right? He
Uh,
because of that 10-year lead up with The Apprentice, and he was used to getting press, and no press is bad press. I think he lived by that motto. As long as he's in the press and they're talking about him, then that attention is good, which it worked for him. And it's concerning because it is the media has a lot of control, and the media also has a lot of money. And so it's like you get into this, you don't know who to trust, and you can't trust, we were at a point where we had a pandemic and we couldn't trust our government to give us the truth, and we weren't sure which websites to look at for accuracy. It's really disturbing. And I have two young kids. So when I started this project and I became really concerned, it was 5 years ago. My oldest was 6 at the time. Um,
yeah,
and so now he's about to turn 12, and my youngest is about to turn 9. And I was kind of in a corporate role and in the middle of an executive MBA program and kind of doing my own thing. And after the election, I realized how dire this situation was, and how we can't rely 100% on politicians to dig us out of this, because that's been the approach that we've taken for so long. And while we have to continue that approach, I don't think that we can rely solely on that anymore. And I think that we need to use technology to connect anybody who wants to start working on these problems, and start working on it. Start working on them now, and connecting the right resources, and just taking every problem and approaching it from what is the best for the community and society and the planet, instead of what is the best for shareholders and investors.
yeah. No, I think that's quite right. And it puts us ordinary citizens into the very difficult position that you described. And so you have to worry about your family and going on and so on. I'm 84, and so my grandchildren are older than your children. Uh, so on. And so it's been going along
And it's
here.
it's getting progressively worse, right? It's like each generation, it's getting harder. And one of the things that really stood out for me was when I found out that our lifespan was decreasing. And, life has gotten so hard. And life has gotten so hard because, all of the benefits of technology and automation and progress, have gone to this elite few. And I don't even consider, the top 1%. It's really the top 0.01%. Those 300 individuals that you talked about in your book, right?
Right,
That's the problem. If we didn't have billionaires, things would be a lot
right,
different.
right, right. And there's an essay or a column this morning. It came out on my email the Senate, saying that the, this was all our fault because the Republicans and under Trump to Biden, there's been quite a shift in the public policy and the relations with Russia and so on, that has intensified the conflict. And so we will see. But if that conflict will mainly suffer the people in Europe who are in very rocky shape at the moment for the thing, and not us. But the violence of the right, as evidenced in January 6th and in episodes since then, is very difficult.
Yeah, I agree. You can tell that there is just so much aggression and so much divide right now. And that is it seems like when we're divided on one issue, we end up like canceling each other and we're not coming to the table on any other issues. And
That's right.
I think that is becoming a huge problem because, we're never going to agree on everything. And with technology, with social media, we'll always be able to find that one thing that we disagree on. And if we want that to be our focus, which it has been for so long, that's a problem. We need to rethink the way that we approach these problems. And I think that we need to do it with intention, and we need to really put thought into how we can use public, support and not rely on politicians. How can we use technology? How can we start connecting those most passionate on all sorts of issues? Because right now you have all of these issues that are doing that, but you're not benefiting from the rest of the community. So there's no way to get enough support behind any one issue because there's 10,000 different issues right now, right?
Well, that's exactly right. And if you look at the social progress administration, you see that our spending on education and on healthcare is very low in terms of other countries. And there doesn't seem to be a way, because a lot of this is delegated to states, and several on the sign things are going that you don't care. The long run project for the New York or the United States is to go downhill because it needs people. The best thing that you can do for your family is make sure that one way or another they get a good education, and then depending on their abilities and who they meet and how things develop, they may do well, not as well as the 0.1%. If you get into the 1%, you're really pretty good.
Yeah, you almost need to get into that 1% just to feel comfort, right? Yeah, and I think you talked about that movement where it's like, okay, now the top 10% is where really like that middle class was, where you could own your house and drive a new car and live comfortably. It's difficult now to really get that comfort. I had a corporate career and I was making six figures, and it was still difficult, living in the middle of New Jersey in a good school district.
Yeah.
And I was faced with this decision. It was, okay, I realize what's going on now. So what's the best way to protect my family, right? Should I try to make enough money to shield them, to insulate them? And what I realize is that there's no way to shield the next generation. Like money will help them, obviously, but I grew up in we weren't in the 1%, but we were comfortable. And I've gone to way too many funerals. I've lost a lot of friends from deaths of despair. I see my cousin's daughter, who is just out of high school and has already lost 3 friends. It scares me. It scares me so much, especially because my marriage ended in a divorce because of addiction. So I know that my kids are, susceptible. It's going to be a struggle, and a lot of people are kind of in the same situation as I am and as they are, just because of the opioid epidemic. So another one of those huge problems, but we're all kind of faced with how to best help the next generation. And I think education is huge, but I also think that we need to, as a society, rethink what it means to contribute and to be employed, because I think for our planet's sake, I think we need to slow down a little bit. And I think that we have a retirement crisis. We've got a senior living crisis on our hands. There are things that people can do that robots can't, right? And one of the big things is just companionship and being there for somebody else. And I think that there is a world where we can use technology for all of get the benefits of technology and automation, and really let people more flexibly contribute to society and live comfortably, if we can share the output of that success with the widespread community.
Yeah, that's right.
You got to have dreams of a better way, right, before you can try something else.
Yeah, but these forces are income inequality, which is not restricted to the United States, but has gone elsewhere too, has made that very hard to change. And climate change is being blocked by the actions of the existing oil producers, and so on. So the thing to do is to just think about your own family or your own circle of friends and how you can help the next generation get on its feet, get a good education, get interested in things, try to do some good, and so on, to keep going.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I really appreciate your time this morning, and thank you so much for the book. I have a link up to it on my website, and I will definitely send that out to the Keiko followers.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and because the book has done well, because it has lasted for 5 years and become more and more relevant as the years go on.
Until we can turn that corner, it's going to continue to. So
yeah, I think that's exactly right.
Well, thank you so much. I hope you and your family stay safe through COVID and warm through the winter.
Yes, stay safe.
Thank you so much.
That's it for this episode of KAKOVISION. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for more.
Keiko, the social app. K-A-K-O. Keiko, the social app. K-A-K-O. Keiko, the social app. Keiko rules. Keiko, the social app. Billionaire greed? Keiko, the social app. Destroying America. Keiko, the social app. T-minus 7 years and